Better thinking, faster decisions, bigger ROI. This is the Finding 12 Minutes podcast. The idea is simple. If you can find 12 minutes of efficiency in your day, you will gain an hour every week. And that changes how you work. Each episode is focused on practical ways to use AI, technology, and smarter strategies to help you move faster, think clearer, and get more done with less effort. So let's find your 12 minutes. So welcome to the first episode of Finding 12 Minutes podcast. This is, I guess, our foundational episode. And I wanted to kind of focus, at least to start around, what is this podcast? Why am I doing it? Why does it exist? Why is 12 minutes a day the most practical way to kind of think about AI or think about innovation, technology, think about the products that you use and how it really kind of connects to artificial intelligence. I think the concept's pretty simple. I wrote a book mid last year, and it was really around this concept of was out teaching, running workshops, going to conferences, keynoting, all around the benefits of why we need to be using artificial intelligence. And it was one of those things to where early on, I think most people were just like, show me how to prompt, show me what to do, help me just kind of learn how to use these tools. What tools should I be selecting? And then what you found is over the next 12 months or so, what you found is that people were then like, okay, so great. Like I know how to use the tool, but I don't understand the ROI. And I don't understand how I can connect it to revenue and a variety of other things. This kind of feels like another expense. So I ended up writing this book called Finding 12 Minutes. And the concept is really, really simple, right? The premise was if you can find 12 minutes of efficiencies per day, you can gain 1 hour per week. Well, over time, that compounds into real capacity, better decisions, measurable business impacts, which I think is great. And so why did I pick 12 minutes and not say 15 minutes or 20 minutes? Well, I wanted to keep it super simple. I wanted to keep it simple as a math equation that most people can actually do in their head while they're listening to a presentation, right? So if you did 12 minutes per day, 5 times a week, 5 days a week, that's basically 12 times 5, which is 60 minutes. 60 minutes times, a complete year, you can save up to about 52 hours of efficiencies. If you're in professional services, that's more billable hours that you can attach to. If you're looking for work-life balance, it's easier. Who doesn't want to do 40 hours of work in 39 hours or 38 hours, have that flexibility? But if you look at it over time, this really does compound into some real capacity again, back to better decisions and really kind of getting into that measurement. So connecting the ROI to the technology, the innovation, the products that you use. This podcast is really designed to be short, direct, and useful in a lot of ways, right? I'm not going to focus on filler. One of the things I like to pride myself on is that most of my presentations, most of my keynotes, most of the workshops that I have done in the past have really focused on more the practical aspects of what we do. It's the practical things and connecting it now back to the revenue. So let's talk a little bit more about why this exists, right? So, the show is really kind of built to answer a pattern, right? And that pattern is one of those things I think is super important to where I'm getting consistent questions about how do I do this? How do I connect it to the ROI? How can I find efficiencies? How can I convince my leadership that we should be investing in AI, et cetera? Those are repeat conversations as well, to where I'm constantly having very similar conversations over and over again. And so I felt that, doing this, I can take questions that have consistently come to me, emails, text messages, conversations that I've had, and really kind of summarize it on a weekly basis around this whole 12-minute concept. What I find is that there are the same friction points around AI, around innovation, questions on where to start, where do I invest? What tools do I look at? if I were to invest in this tool, how do I connect it back to revenue? So we're going to answer a lot of those questions. So instead of answering these things from a one-off perspective, I felt that I could probably just use this podcast to kind of scale those answers, and kind of build more of a living record, so that if you wanted to go back and listen to this, or you've come up with that question, you come across this podcast, gives you an opportunity to kind of hear my answer, in a 12-minute burst. So it gives you a way to think, not just what to do, but to really kind of help you get into that decision mindset. So how do you make better decisions? How do you make faster decisions around these things? And where do you really kind of then turn around and drive basically either customer value, business value, et cetera? So what can you expect? Each episode is going to be right around that 12-minute mark, right? I think as much as we like this concept that I can spend an hour listening to someone, and some podcasts go on for way longer than that. But I also think that I couldn't cover what I needed to cover in 5 minutes. So might as well lean into my own branding and my own marketing and focus on the 12 minutes. So I'm going to try to give you in each episode just a 12 minutes deep dive on a variety of different topics when it comes to essentially AI innovation. So some of the focus topics that I think I want to cover, and I got a good, nice running list of these things right now, is, focus on AI in real business environments. Like, how are people really using it? And how is that implementation happening? What are the results are they getting? Where did they start? And I think that when it comes to those kinds of things, I think that when we're able to kind of see what other businesses are doing, it's going to make it easier for us to kind of relate to it, going forward on how it could work in our business. So that's also going to focus on the innovation that actually gets implemented. Like, we see all these things on LinkedIn. It's like, oh, I did this and I'm generating, $10,000 a month in monthly recurring revenue, or I'm doing this, or I eliminated this team. I think a lot of that's overplayed. I think those are just people being just, bombastic in terms of the things that they think that they're doing. But what is really being implemented? How is it really working? Where are the innovations and implementations really making the biggest impact? And where could we do that within our organizations? Then you start thinking about, like, it's one thing to say that you want to do it and you want to get it implemented. Another thing is to kind of think about, how do you focus on technology adoption without disruption to your business? How do we think about when we onboard a new tool, how do we actually get the organization to use it? And I think that is one of the big things that we'll dive into week after week is, just because I gave everyone this tool doesn't mean they know how to use it. They don't know how to implement it into their processes. They don't know what to do with those things. So it's going to be pretty important to kind of dive into those things. And then we want to start getting into product strategy. So if you're in the business of actually developing products, and you're in the business of selling products to customers, and maybe it's an internal product, what is the strategy to incorporate AI? I think one of the biggest challenges, and I want to do a whole episode on this, is that you see what's happening in the fast food area, to where they're putting protein in everything. Protein donuts and protein in your coffee. I even saw something recently about protein in Hot Pockets. So you see protein in everywhere, and it's like, I don't want AI to be that way. And I think in some ways that is happening, to where people are just putting AI in things that it shouldn't be in there, right? When you think about AI inside of an ERP, it really does need to be pretty strategic. What are you doing with that? Like, what is the goal? Is it just to say that you have AI enabled ERP, or are you actually driving customer value? So when you start thinking about your products and you start thinking about where AI gets implemented, it becomes really important discussion. It's just like, don't become protein donuts. You want to really kind of be very strategic about where that goes. And so we'll talk a little bit about that, within the next several weeks, around how that actually does play out. Another way we can think about is practical ways to improve efficiency. I think at the end of the day, we got really, really worried that AI was going to take a bunch of jobs. And then what you found is that it really wasn't going to take a lot of jobs. Even the companies that are laying people off now are having a little bit of buyer's remorse, and in some instances are actually rehiring some of those individuals back, right? I do think that there's pockets to where some people are going to be basically augmented by technology. It's inevitable, right? When you think about, go back to architects when AutoCAD came out, The architect did not go away. The drafting table did. Big rooms with drafting tables went away. Everything's done on a computer. The same thing when you go way back, right? When the car came out, well, maybe blacksmiths kind of, went away because they didn't have to put shoes on horses anymore. But there's other jobs that open up that became mechanics. So you see that there's practical ways to improve efficiency, but I think we can have a good conversation about how that actually plays out when we're talking about, real practical impacts. So again, we're really going to be focused on no theory for the sake of theory, and each episode is really going to design to give you something that you can use immediately, or at least giving you kind of thinking about that. So diving back into, the 12-minute concept, right? Most people look for transformation. They typically start in the wrong place, right? I like to say start with 12 minutes. Right? The 12 minutes a day reduces manual work, speeds up decision making, improves access to information, eliminates low risk tasks. Doesn't feel like much, but it does compound, right? So when you go back to that original formula, 12 minutes per day times 5 days a week, that's 1 hour per week. 1 hour per week is 52 hours per year. So this is capacity that you didn't have before, and AI is going to be that lever to help make that possible. So when you think about the core idea, AI is really just not a content tool. There's some real value, right? There's faster analysis, there's better comparisons, there's immediate access to knowledge, and that's where efficiency is created. And that's where the ROI then ends up. So ultimately, when we think about this, we want to look at it from, who's this podcast really going to be for? And it's going to be for the professional who wants to kind of move faster without necessarily adding headcount. It's going to be about making better decisions and with better information, and then applying AI in practical ways. So let's kind of cut through the noise and really kind of focus on what works. So wrapping up this first 12 minutes, this is going to be good, right? Like, don't forget, start small, find your first 12 minutes, identify that one task that you do every day and ask, can AI reduce this by 12 minutes? That's your entry point. You don't need more time. Yeah, you just need to use your time differently. And hopefully this podcast will give you an opportunity to show you how to do that. Well, that's your 12 minutes. If you found value in this, share it with someone who needs to work smarter, but not harder. And remember, small efficiencies compound. Find 12 minutes a day and the results will take care of themselves. I'll see you in the next episode.